everyone, I'm Adelaide, and we are from Singapore School, Pantai, Indah, Kapuk in Indonesia.
My name is Kaylee.
My name is Madeline.
My name is Callista.
My name is Sinua.
My name is Audrey.
So for the first question, Meta operates as a two-sided market, meaning it connects two different groups, users and advertisers. Instead of charging both groups equally, Meta allows users to use Facebook and Instagram for free while charging advertisers to reach those users. This is known as asymmetric pricing, and it is a profit maximizing because the value each group receives depends on participation from the other side. The key economic concept is cross-site network effects. A cross-site network effect occurs when the number of participants on one side increases the value for participants on the other side. For Meta, more users make the platform more attractive to advertisers because advertisements can reach a larger audience. More advertisers then generate greater advertising revenue, allowing Meta to invest in improving the platform while continuing to offer it for free. This creates a positive feedback loop that strengthens both sides of the market. Meta chooses to subsidize users by offering free access because users are generally more price sensitive. Even a small subscription fee could cause many users to leave the platform. If user number falls, advertisers lose access to a large audience, making advertising less valuable. This would reduce advertising demand and ultimately lower Meta's profits. In contrast, advertisers are willing to pay because the platform gives them access to millions of potential customers and highly targeted advertising, making the advertising more effective. This pricing strategy maximizes Meta's profits because keeping the platform free attracts the largest possible user base. A larger user base increases the value of the platform to advertisers through cross-site network effects. Since advertisers compete to reach these users, Meta can charge higher prices for advertising through auction systems. Therefore, the platform earns more from advertisers than it would likely earn by charging users directly. This makes subsidizing users while charging advertisers the profit maximizing pricing structure.
For question 2, we'll be addressing behavioral data, advertising prices, and market concentration. Behavioral data increases the value of advertising because it reduces information asymmetry between advertisers and consumers. Rather than purchasing advertising space alone, firms are purchasing the probability of reaching consumers who are most likely to buy their products. Behavioral information such as browsing history, engagement patterns, and previous purchases improves targeting accuracy, increasing expected conversion rates and lowering customer acquisition costs. Consequently, advertisers earn a higher expected return on investment and become willing to pay more for each advertising impression. Since the supply of advertising inventory is relatively fixed in the short run, the demand for targeted advertising shifts outward, allowing platforms to charge higher CPM and CPC prices for essentially the same advertising space. Data concentration and market structure. However, the economic effects extend beyond pricing. Behavioral data generates increasing returns to scale. Platforms with more users collect more data, enabling better algorithms, more accurate targeting, and stronger advertising performance. This attracts additional advertisers and users, creating a self-reinforcing cycle known as data network effects. These network effects create substantial barriers to entry because new platforms cannot replicate years of accumulated behavioral data. As advertisers concentrate on spending on platforms with the highest targeting accuracy, the market becomes increasingly oligopolistic, allowing dominant firms such as Meta and Google to earn economic rents and exercise greater pricing power. Overall, behavioral data improves allocative efficiency by matching advertisements more effectively, but its concentration reduces market contestability and reinforces the dominance of a small number of platforms. The digital advertising market therefore illustrates the trade-off between economic efficiency and competitive market structure.
The third question is about welfare economics of the attention economy. So although social media platforms are free to access, users pay by providing behavioral data and attention, which platforms monetize through advertising. From a welfare economics perspective, whether users benefit depends on whether these benefits outweigh the hidden costs. As shown in diagram 1, the monetary price is $0, so users receive consumer surplus, which is the difference between their willingness to pay and the price they pay. Social media provides communication, entertainment, education, and networking, suggesting that users gain significant benefits from free access. However, the service has an effective price. Users give up personal data, privacy, and time, while platforms use algorithms to maximize engagement and advertising revenue. These hidden non-monetary costs reduce users' net consumer surplus. User welfare also depends on information asymmetry. Platforms know far more than users about how algorithms collect data and influence behavior, so users may underestimate the true cost of using social media. As a result, their decisions may not fully reflect their true preferences. The case study supports this. Facebook's internal research linking heavy Instagram use to poorer mental health was not publicly disclosed, and although 72% of users tried to reduce their social media use, 54% were unsuccessful. This suggests algorithms may encourage greater usage than users would choose if they were fully informed. Nevertheless, users voluntarily continue using these platforms because they provide substantial value. Regulations such as the EU's Digital Services Act, which increases algorithm transparency and offers chronological feeds, can reduce information asymmetry and help users make more informed choices. Overall, users likely receive positive consumer surplus from free social media services. However, the effective price of lost privacy, behavioral data, and time, together with information asymmetry, reduces net welfare. Therefore, while users probably benefit overall, greater transparency is needed to ensure their choices better reflect their true preferences.
The problem-solving question is about how social media platforms are two-sided markets, free to users, paid by advertisers, linked by cross-site network effects. But free is misleading because users are actually paying with their attention and their data. Once you treat that as the real price of the service, three distinct market failures come into focus. The first is an internality. Algorithms optimize for engagement exploit present bias, so scrolling for just one more minute feels essentially costless in the moment, even though the cumulative cost over time is significant. Average daily use climbed from about 90 minutes in 2013 to nearly 2.5 hours by 2023. And when we look at users who actually tried to cut back on their own, 72% simply couldn't. This diagram is what turns the claim into a market failure, not just an observation. The second failure is information asymmetry. Users have no visibility into how these algorithms actually work behind the scenes. We saw exactly how serious that opacity can be when whistleblower Frances Haugen revealed Facebook's own internal research, which had linked heavy Instagram use to worsening mental health in teenagers. Research the company hadn't disclosed on their own. The third failure is concentration. Just 5 platforms account for roughly two-thirds of global ad spending, and that scale is enough to weaken the competitive pressure that will otherwise discipline how these companies behave. Given these three failures, our recommendation is the algorithmic choice mandate as our core policy, combined with a narrow earmark levy and a light touch transparency report.
We screen all 4 options against net welfare gain, no platform exit, and proportionality. Data minimization removes the data that makes targeting possible, but targeted ads earn 2 to 3 times the click-through rate of non-targeted ones. So this collapses the cross-subsidy that funds free access, failing no exit, and since it bans data collection broadly to fix what is really an engagement design problem, it also fails proportionality. Structural separation removes a standalone network's main revenue source, risking exit, and loses economies of scope between data and ad matching, an efficiency cost that fails welfare, and because it targets market concentration rather than the user welfare harm, the committee identified it fails proportionality too. That's 2 of 4 eliminated. The algorithmic choice mandate passes all 3. It preserves the ad revenue model since advertisers keep access to whoever opts in, satisfying no exit and welfare, and it targets the specific engagement design mechanism rather than banning data or restructuring the business, satisfying proportionality. And there's precedent since the EU's Digital Services Act already requires something similar. The attention levy also survives but only partially. It passes no exit if kept small, but on its own delivers welfare gains only for users who opt in, leaving most of the market welfare gap untouched. So two options are eliminated. One passes cleanly and one passes only partially, which is exactly why we selected a hybrid B as the core with narrow versions of C and A's underlying goal added in, not A or D in their original form.
This chart is the evidence that rules out the cheaper fix. If the failure were pure information asymmetry, disclosure alone should shift behavior, but 72% of informed, motivated users still couldn't self-correct, so information isn't the binding constraint. The 25 to 92% gap is the empirical signature of status quo bias instead. The default is acting as an anchor on consumption, independent of preference. That's what justifies a default mandate specifically, rather than a warning label or disclosure requirement, which would show almost no gap between these two bars. By making the feed chronological by default while keeping the algorithm opt-in, we shift the path of least resistance for present biased users, building the correction into the architecture instead of relying on willpower, which a 72% figure already showed doesn't work. It also remains commercially viable. Advertisers still reach users who opt into the algorithmic feed, so the ad revenue model is largely preserved, which is why this satisfies the no exit constraint.
QM2 stopping short of QOpt is the honest part of this diagram, not a shortfall. A Pigovian tax that fully internalizes the externality needs to be equal to the marginal external cost at every unit. But given the concentration under failure 3, incidence theory says a levy that large would be passed through to advertisers in a low elasticity market, landing hardest on SMEs with no substitute channel. So this is second best outcome by design. Welfare improving relative to no levy, but deliberately capped below the first best Pigovian level to avoid the downstream harm. Two supplements close the remaining places. The narrow earmarked levy targets the residual failure 1. The transparency reports targets failure 2 directly. Platform must disclose what behavioral data drives their feed, closing the gap the Huggin documents revealed. One honest gap, failure 3, concentration is diagnosed but not directly corrected by the recommendation. Structural separation would target it, but as we showed, it fails two of the three committees' constraints, so a full fix would need a separate competition policy intervention designed to clear those constraints where option D couldn't. The most significant trade-off is enforcement, not design. Platforms have a clear incentive to build friction-heavy or misleading opt-in flows that technically comply with the default mandate while quietly undermining it. A Goodhart's law problem, where regulating the existence of a rule invites compliance only in form. That's why the transparency report isn't a separate add-on. Its disclosure obligations should specifically require platforms to report on their opt-in interface design, keeping the default mandate honest in practice. To summarize our full answer, we recommend the algorithmic choice mandate as the core policy targeting the internality we identified, combined with a narrow levy for the residual gap and the transparency and audit requirement for the information asymmetry. With market concentration knowingly left for a separate competition policy action,